Prince William had reached a decision. Camilla would no longer retain control of the private Windsor residence she had long considered secure. Authority over the suite would be transferred directly to Princess Catherine. With a single signature, a collection of rooms became a powerful statement, and everyone within palace walls immediately understood its significance. Before we continue, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an update. William sat quietly reviewing the transfer documents. His eyes settled on a single name. The Windsor Suite was more than a private residence. Within the royal household, it represented influence, trusted access, staff support, and close proximity to the center of royal activity. Whoever controlled the suite possessed more than rooms. They occupied a visible position within Windsor's inner circle. The prince knew that removing Camilla would be interpreted as far more than a housing adjustment. It would be viewed as a judgment about status and standing. He paused briefly before signing the final page. Then, without hesitation, he approved the transfer, placing the suite under Catherine's authority effective immediately. The decision did not return the residence to general palace administration. Instead, it granted Catherine direct responsibility over its future use. Additional instructions shifted authority over guest arrangements, staff access, and property decisions. William was not simply handing over keys, he was redefining boundaries. Camilla received notice of the decision in private. As she read the document, her expression tightened. She lowered the page and asked only one question. Had the order already been finalized? When informed that it had, she fell silent. What troubled her most was not the move itself, but the fact that Catherine had been personally chosen. This was not a temporary measure or routine reshuffle. William had deliberately named his wife as the new authority. Closing the folder, William turned to the waiting official. Make the change today. The instruction was delivered calmly, yet its impact spread instantly throughout Windsor. New directives would soon arrive, old permissions would disappear, and everyone close to the royal household understood what that meant. Camilla's first concern was not where she would go next. Instead, she wanted to know why Catherine had been selected. Beneath that question lay another concern, one linked to a disagreement weeks earlier that she had hoped was over. It wasn't. In fact, that incident had become the very reason the suite was changing hands. Yet the residence itself was only the visible prize. Behind the transfer stood three individuals with very different views about loyalty, family, responsibility, and the future of the monarchy. For William, the suite represented responsibility. For Catherine, it symbolized an unexpected rise in authority. For Camilla, losing it felt like something far more painful than relocation. Behind the royal titles stood three people measuring the same decision through years of sacrifice, frustration, loyalty, and personal history. What began as a dispute over Windsor was quickly becoming something much larger, a struggle over belonging itself. Catherine read the transfer notice alongside William and immediately felt the significance of seeing her own name attached to it. She was not simply receiving a set of rooms. Within the royal household, control of a residence carried responsibility, authority, and influence. What made the situation even more difficult was that Catherine had never requested the Windsor Suite. She had never campaigned for it or suggested that anyone be removed. Being selected by William signaled trust, but it also placed her directly in the middle of a conflict she had not created. William watched her carefully as she reached the final page. His perspective had changed over recent years. Increasingly, he viewed his role not only as protecting the present monarchy, but also safeguarding the institution his children would one day inherit. From his point of view, unclear lines of authority inside Windsor threatened that stability. When Catherine finally looked up and asked whether removing Camilla was truly necessary, William did not soften his response. "This is no longer about comfort," he told her. "It's about authority being exercised from the wrong place." Meanwhile, Camilla sat alone after dismissing her aide. The anger that initially carried her through the shock slowly faded, replaced by something far more difficult to acknowledge: humiliation. She understood that palace staff would recognize the meaning of the transfer immediately. They would see Catherine's name where hers had once appeared. They would receive new instructions from different officers. A residence previously associated with her influence would now become connected to the next generation. The inconvenience itself was manageable. The symbolism was not. Catherine placed the papers back on the table. "If this happens," she said quietly, "it cannot be about revenge." William answered instantly. "It isn't." Only then did he reveal information she had not yet heard. According to William, unofficial meetings had increasingly taken place through the Windsor Suite, and directions had occasionally been issued outside the household channels normally used for royal administration. Those channels existed so staff would always know exactly whose authority they were expected to follow. He then disclosed another important detail. Leaving the suite empty had been discussed. He rejected the idea. William wanted Catherine in control because her position represented continuity within the line of succession. By assigning the residence to her, he believed responsibility was being moved closer to the monarchy's future. That decision changed everything. He was not simply removing Camilla's authority. He was intentionally placing responsibility where he believed the future of the crown belonged. Catherine studied him carefully. This time her expression showed concern rather than surprise. Then William finally explained where the entire issue had begun. Several weeks earlier, during a private reception at Windsor, an instruction issued by Camilla had crossed a line he had promised himself would never be crossed again. That distinction, between revenge and necessity, would become critical later. Because when the family eventually looked back at the event that triggered the transfer, everything led to a single evening where quiet distrust became an irreversible decision. Every major palace dispute has a moment that participants remember differently. But nobody forgets it. For William, that moment occurred during a private Windsor reception weeks before the transfer. There was no public confrontation.
No dramátic announcement. No headlines.
Only a single instruction issued behind closed doors. One staff member caught between competing authorities. And one realization that completely changed the prince's view of the situation. From that evening onward, the Windsor Suite stopped being merely a residence. William had already sensed that tensions were becoming difficult to manage. Small disagreements over schedules, rooms, and staff access had gradually begun overlapping. Time after time, he chose restraint rather than confrontation. He did not want ordinary friction to become another royal crisis. Then one evening made that impossible. During the reception, Camilla instructed a senior household official to clear a nearby room for guests connected to her office. The problem was that Catherine's team had already scheduled the same room for an important briefing. Believing the space fell within her authority, Camilla proceeded with the change. The official complied. But the decision created immediate complications. When Catherine arrived, members of her staff were waiting outside with nowhere to hold their meeting. Rather than challenge anyone publicly, she calmly relocated the briefing and carried on. Her composure prevented a public scene. But William noticed the discomfort she tried so hard to hide. And that mattered to him more than anyone realized. William waited until later that evening before speaking with Camilla privately. He wanted to understand why Catherine's briefing had been moved without consultation. Camilla's answer was straightforward. She believed her position gave her sufficient authority over that section of Windsor. William listened carefully, but the explanation did not ease his concerns. Instead, it confirmed something deeper that had been troubling him for some time. Two different versions of authority were now operating inside the same household. And that was becoming a problem. The tension continued to grow after the reception ended. Not long afterward, a household officer quietly presented William with a series of written instructions that had originated through Camilla's residential office. These were not rumors. They were documented directives. Several decisions regarding room access and staff arrangements had already been made without William's knowledge. What initially appeared to be a single awkward incident suddenly looked like part of a broader pattern. The prince placed the copied instructions beside Catherine's abandoned briefing folder and studied them in silence. Frustration slowly became certainty. Finally, he looked toward an advisor and delivered a simple instruction. "Bring me the residence papers tomorrow morning." That moment marked the turning point. Weeks later, those same documents would return to Windsor. But this time, William would not be searching for answers. He would be carrying a decision. Unlike many royal disputes, the confrontation did not occur through intermediaries or carefully drafted correspondence. William chose to speak directly with Camilla himself. No crowded meeting room. No officials acting as buffers. No opportunity for either side to hide behind palace procedure. Inside Windsor, he placed the signed transfer document in front of her and calmly explained that both the residence and the authority attached to it were being reassigned. What followed was not merely a disagreement over accommodation. It became a clash between two competing visions of influence within the royal household. William had intentionally waited until every aspect of the transfer was finalized before arranging the meeting. The signed order covered not only control of the suite itself but also staff responsibilities, room allocations, guest access, and operational authority connected to the residence. He wanted one thing to be clear. The discussion was not about whether the transfer would happen. It was already happening. Catherine was deliberately absent from the meeting. William did not want anyone to suggest that his wife had pressured him into taking action. Camilla lowered her eyes toward the document and immediately understood what it meant. Her authority over the Windsor Suite was ending. Catherine would assume responsibility effective immediately. She slowly pushed her chair back and asked whether William truly understood how this would appear within the household. To her, the humiliation was obvious. Staff would know. Family members would know. Every updated instruction would quietly reinforce the same message. Her influence at Windsor had been reduced. William remained calm. He acknowledged the personal cost but insisted that the suite had become a source of competing instructions and overlapping authority. After reviewing the written records, he no longer believed the situation could continue. Allowing it to remain unchanged, in his view, would only create greater confusion at the center of a residence closely connected to royal operations. Camilla's frustration intensified. She accused William of using one disagreement as an excuse to reshape the internal hierarchy of the family. The prince did not completely reject that accusation. He admitted that assigning the suite to Catherine carried undeniable symbolic weight. Catherine's name would now appear where Camilla's once had. But, he argued, the symbolism was a result of the problem, not its cause. The boundary had already been crossed. The transfer came afterward. Then Camilla asked the question William had expected from the very beginning. Did Charles approve this? Silence filled the room. After a moment, William answered carefully. The king had been informed before the order was finalized. And he had not stopped it. Camilla slowly slid the document back across the table. William left it where it was. Several seconds passed before she finally spoke again. So it's already done? Yes. The answer struck harder than the transfer itself. If Charles had known and chosen not to intervene, then something far larger than a residence had shifted. Yet the most important factor behind William's decision was not the argument taking place inside that room. It was the gradual redistribution of influence happening throughout Windsor itself. Royal authority is rarely defined by a single signature. It grows through access, responsibility, precedent, and the willingness of others to recognize it. William could only remove Camilla from the suite because the structure around him had already begun moving in that direction. Senior officials saw it. Charles understood it. And Catherine, despite having no desire to celebrate the transfer, suddenly found herself standing at the center of a transformation much larger than any one residence. King Charles received the completed briefing and reviewed it quietly. The document outlined the residence transfer, staff responsibilities, and future authority over the Windsor Suite in clear terms. Within the royal household, decisions involving residences carried practical consequences. They determined who could approve access, authorize guests, oversee schedules, and direct the staff working around a royal property. Such responsibilities often shaped influence long before any public title changed. As Charles reached the section describing the confusion created by competing instructions, he paused. The king understood both sides. He wanted to spare Camilla unnecessary humiliation. Yet he could also see why William believed action had become unavoidable. Conflicting directions had started creating uncertainty about who truly held authority inside Windsor. Allowing that uncertainty to continue risked weakening trust throughout the household. For Charles, the difficulty came from recognizing that defending his wife completely might also mean ignoring a problem his son would eventually inherit. William had not excluded his father from the process. Before signing the final order, he had given Charles every opportunity to intervene. The king could have delayed the transfer. He could have challenged it. He could have demanded an alternative solution. Instead, he chose none of those options. That silence became one of the most significant parts of the entire story. It demonstrated that William was being allowed to exercise authority, even when the result created personal discomfort for the monarch himself. After finishing the briefing, Charles removed his glasses and closed the folder. For several moments, his hand remained resting on top of it. Finally, he looked toward his private secretary. "No intervention," he said quietly. "Let him carry responsibility for the decision he has made." The words were calm, but there was sadness behind them. Charles was not celebrating the transfer. He was accepting it. Meanwhile, Catherine soon discovered that the suite brought more than prestige. The new arrangement gave her responsibility for how the residence would be used during family gatherings and official functions. Her role was becoming operational rather than symbolic. She would now approve decisions that had previously passed through Camilla's office. It was a responsibility she had never expected to inherit. The change became visible almost immediately. Staff members who once received instructions through Camilla's residential office were informed of a new reporting structure. Schedules were updated. Approvals shifted. Administrative authority gradually reorganized itself around Catherine. By the following morning, the transition was no longer theoretical. Doors, schedules, staff assignments, and loyalties were already beginning to move. Real power changes are rarely dramatic at first. Instead, they reveal themselves through ordinary routines. A familiar aide receives new instructions. A key no longer opens a door it once controlled. A name quietly disappears from a schedule. And by the morning after William's order, Windsor was experiencing exactly that kind of transformation. Camilla slowly walked through the rooms before packing began. There was no anger from staff.
No dramatic eviction.
A structured process had been arranged, with belongings catalogued and transferred in stages. Yet somehow the professionalism made the moment feel even colder. She rested her hand on the back of a familiar chair and looked around the room. Then she turned toward an aide. "Nothing stays," she said softly. The words were quiet, but the disappointment behind them was unmistakable. When Catherine learned preparations were already underway for her arrival, she reacted immediately. There would be no celebration.
No photographs. No ceremonial handover.
She refused to allow the transfer to become a public display of succession. Catherine understood what the suite represented. But she also understood that accepting it through another person's loss carried a human cost. As staff conducted inventories throughout the residence, another discovery emerged. Inside a locked cabinet used for household correspondence, officials found records showing just how much business had flowed through Camilla's office. The documents included guest arrangements, access approvals, internal instructions, and operational notes that revealed how deeply the suite had become connected to working authority. When William was informed, he made an immediate decision. Nothing would be destroyed. Everything would be archived. He wanted a complete record preserved, not because he sought another confrontation, but because he did not want similar uncertainty to return in the future. As the first labeled box was prepared for removal, Camilla stopped the aide handling it. "Give me 5 minutes," she said. The room fell silent as the door closed behind her. Alone at last, the anger slowly faded. What remained was clarity. And when she finally emerged, she made an unexpected request. She did not ask to see William. She asked to see Catherine. Those 5 quiet minutes changed everything. When Camilla emerged from the suite, she no longer wanted another discussion with William. Instead, she requested a private meeting with Catherine, the woman who was about to receive what she was losing. There would be no advisors.
No secretaries.
No officials recording every word. For the first time since William's order, the two women found themselves face to face without the protection of palace structures standing between them. What might have become an exchange of accusations revealed something far more complicated. On one side stood humiliation. On the other stood discomfort. And between them was the realization that neither woman had created the institution they were now struggling to navigate. Catherine agreed to the meeting because she understood the danger of silence. If the Windsor transfer hardened into a personal feud, every future public appearance would carry tension beneath the surface. She also knew she could not ignore her own role in the situation. The transfer had been William's decision, but her name was now attached to it. The formal allocation placed the suite under her control, and she could not pretend she had no connection to its consequences. Camilla wasted little time. Her first question was direct. "Did you want these rooms?" Catherine answered immediately. She had never requested the suite. She had never asked William to remove anyone. And she had never viewed the residence as something she was entitled to receive. At first, the answer changed nothing. Camilla was still carrying the sting of losing a place that had become closely connected to her daily authority. But gradually the focus of her frustration shifted. She admitted that changing residences was not what hurt the most. The deeper wound came from knowing that Charles had been aware of the transfer and allowed it to proceed without warning her personally. The pain was not in the paperwork. It was in the silence. Catherine listened carefully before responding. She explained that William's concerns had never centered on possession or status. The issue had been the competing instructions emerging from the suite and the growing tendency for decisions to bypass established household channels. Then Catherine made one thing absolutely clear. She would not use the suite to create a rival center of influence. The residence would not become a competing court. It would not be used as a weapon against another branch of the family. That response surprised Camilla. Instead of rejecting the explanation, she acknowledged something she had previously resisted. The suite may have become too closely connected to authority. What began as convenience had gradually evolved into something much harder to separate from control. Looking back, she could understand why William believed the line had become blurred. For several moments, neither woman spoke. Then Camilla made a simple request. "Don't let this become a symbol of victory over me." Catherine answered without hesitation. "I won't treat it as something I won." The reply hung quietly between them. As Camilla reached the doorway, she paused. Neither woman moved. Finally, she spoke softly. "Perhaps we understand each other now." That private understanding eased some of the tension between them. But it could not stop what was already happening outside Windsor. The story had escaped the palace. Headlines were spreading rapidly. Broadcasters described the transfer as a major shift in influence. Commentators analyzed every detail. Crowds searched public appearances for clues about who had gained ground and who had lost it. By sunrise, what had started as a private family dispute had become a national spectacle. Television discussions framed the transfer as a generational change in power. Outside royal gates, cameras waited for any glimpse that might reveal the atmosphere inside Windsor. Yet one image captured the moment more clearly than all the speculation combined. Camilla leaving Windsor quietly and without ceremony. Only hours later, Catherine arrived for official duties through a different entrance, refusing every opportunity to comment on the controversy. The palace confirmed the change using carefully measured language. Responsibility for the Windsor Suite had passed from Camilla to Catherine under William's signed order. Officials insisted the move should not be viewed as punishment. Technically, it was a transfer of responsibility concerning rooms, staff access, and operational arrangements, not a removal of rank. But the public understood something important. Symbols often speak louder than titles. Soon, newspapers intensified the narrative. One headline declared that Windsor had changed hands. Photographs of both women appeared side by side. Camilla was portrayed as the face of loss. Catherine as the face of rising influence. Within hours, what began as an internal household matter had become a national debate about power, succession, and authority. And the pressure surrounding the royal family continued to grow. As public attention intensified, Catherine responded in the only way she believed would calm the situation. She delayed moving into the Windsor Suite herself. For the time being, the rooms would be used only for official meetings and scheduled working events. Nothing more. William immediately understood what she was doing. Catherine was accepting the authority he had entrusted to her while removing every appearance of celebration. There would be no victory lap, no symbolic takeover, and no suggestion that another woman's loss was a gain. Slowly, the atmosphere surrounding the dispute began to change. For the first time since the transfer, space emerged for something the family had not yet achieved: a genuine conversation free from headlines, staff movements, and competing instructions. And when public speculation reached its loudest point, the family arrived at its quietest and most important moment. They had to decide what William's order would ultimately represent. In the end, the Windsor Suite became neither Catherine's triumph nor Camilla's battlefield. It became evidence of something much larger. Proof that the monarchy could no longer allow blurred boundaries to survive simply for the sake of avoiding discomfort. William had made a choice that caused pain to someone close to his father. Camilla had been forced to confront the limits of her influence. Catherine inherited responsibilities she had never sought. And Charles faced the reality that the future was arriving faster than he expected. Eventually, the king brought William and Camilla together for one final private discussion. The purpose was not to reverse the decision, nor was it to negotiate a compromise. Charles wanted everyone involved to understand why the transfer had happened and what would come next. The Windsor Suite would remain under Catherine's authority. Responsibility for access, staff arrangements, scheduling, and future use would stay with her household. There would be no quiet reversal after public attention faded. Turning first to Camilla, Charles admitted that he regretted allowing the process to move forward without warning her personally. His silence had protected procedure, but it had also hurt his wife. Camilla accepted the apology, though she made no attempt to hide the fact that the pain remained. Losing the rooms had been difficult. Discovering that Charles knew beforehand and said nothing had been far harder. William then addressed his father directly. He explained that removing Camilla from control of the suite had never been about weakening her position beside the king, nor had it been an attempt to diminish her role within the family. His concern had been the growing overlap of authority within Windsor. If competing instructions continued unchecked, ordinary disagreements would eventually become tests of loyalty. For the future king, that risk had become impossible to ignore. At that point, Catherine's earlier restraint took on even greater significance. By refusing to move immediately into the suite, she had removed any appearance of victory. She accepted responsibility without treating another person's loss as a prize. That decision gave Camilla room to accept the outcome without feeling publicly humiliated. For the first time, Camilla openly acknowledged the concern that had once angered her. The suite had gradually become more than a residence. Too many instructions had passed through it. The line between convenience and authority had slowly disappeared. That admission finally ended the argument. William's decision would stand. Catherine would retain control of the Windsor Suite. Camilla would relinquish it permanently. And Charles accepted that his son's growing responsibilities would sometimes require difficult choices, even choices the king himself found painful. As the meeting concluded, Camilla stood first. William rose as well. For a brief moment, neither spoke. Then Camilla looked at him and said quietly, "I understand why you did it now." William nodded. "That was all I wanted." The Windsor Suite remained with Catherine. Yet nobody left the situation as a winner. Camilla lost a symbol of influence. William accepted the burden of enforcing boundaries. Charles surrendered the comfort of avoiding conflict. And Catherine transformed what appeared to be a victory into an act of restraint. That became the lasting lesson of the Windsor decision. The future of the monarchy would not depend on who occupied the grandest rooms. It would depend on who understood where authority should begin and where it must end. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video.